Hello, and in this video what I'm going to be covering is the use of a really cool feature inside of Maya called transfer maps. So what transfer maps does, it allows us to transfer certain visual attributes of an object onto other objects. You can transfer high poly information onto low poly information, you can transfer light information and bake it down onto an object so that it permanently looks like it's lit, even though it's not. What I'm going to be covering inside this video is how we can use it for really quick, fairly cheap, high poly asset information to bake down onto a single plane so that we can then take that into our game engines, our animations, or whatever's. And we're not going to have the impact of having thousands upon thousands of bits of information in the scene. So you can see here I've got 4 different pieces of geometry. One is a complete blank, so the bottom one down here is just a piece of blank geometry, so I don't really need that, but we can use that as a tester. But I have got these purple, green, and blue, so they're all different kind of qualities. Okay. So you can see there's a lot of information inside the scene as well. In total, there's nearly there's 500,000 faces just here. So obviously that's not necessarily something I can take into a game engine or whatever. And Maya itself is struggling with it. So I just turn off the wireframe. You can see what I've got here. I've got some see-through objects, or not see-through, but I've got some geometry with height information, as well as negative space. I've got a piece of geometry which is made up of a very bumpy surface, as well as kind of cobbly or more tiled surface that is in a repeating pattern. And I've also got this piece, which is almost like a bit of a trim sheet. So I've got a piece of geometry. Ooh, I've got a hole there. So let me just fill that hole. There you go. So I've got a piece of geometry which is very high poly, but can be used as a trim sheet for like a sci-fi environment. Okay, so I'm going to be using this. I'm going to be using transfer maps to actually create low poly single plane assets that we can use as tileable textures, unique textures, or as part as our trim sheet or our asset pack. Okay, so as you can see, I've made these up into squares. This one is trailing off on the sides a little bit, but that's just going to help me actually do some repeat patterning or tileable textures. I've got each one in its own little individual layer, as well as 4 blank templates I can actually bake down onto. Now, as you can see, I've actually applied a Phong onto these, so they've got a lot of specularity on them. Now, what I'm going to be doing is transferring height information and alpha information, so that's really going to help me get across what we intend for our objects. So, what I'm going to do first is do the almost like the factory floor sort of steel flooring material here. So, very simple what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the top here where it says modeling, and I'm going to come down to rendering. And then I'll come up to light and shading here. And inside light and shading, I've got transfer maps, and just underneath baking. So when I go to transfer maps, I've got this window that comes up. Now this window has everything we need to know. And it's quite simple to understand. So at the very top, we've got target mesh. Then we've got source mesh, output maps, connected output maps, Maya common attributes, and advanced options. So advanced options and connect output maps, we don't need to worry about. All we need to really do is think about target mesh, source mesh, output maps, and Maya common output. Okay, so target mesh, this is where we're actually going to input our low poly model. So in this case, it's just going to be a single plane of geometry. Just this very single plane. So when I've got that selected, I'm going to say add selection, and we see here we've got our P plane shape 34. All good. In source meshes, I've got to choose my high poly object. So in this case, it's going to be this piece here. So I then click add selected. You can see there we've got our object selected in there. Now inside output maps, this is what I can decide what I'm actually taking out. I can take out normal, displacement, diffuse, shaded, and alpha. So I actually want to take out an alpha and a normal. So if I click normal, You can see here we've now got this map input here. Now, by default, it wants to do this as a DDS. Now, because we generally work in TIFFs or JPEGs, I'm actually going to turn this to a JPEG. You can see here in the normal map name, it's going to send it to a destination. In this case, it's going to be the default Maya project's destination. And I'm just going to name this as Steel Floor Alpha. Steel Floor Normal, because that's the normal map we're doing here. Okay, everything else in this I can leave as it is. And then I can click Alpha. Same thing. Looking for a DDS, but we're going to change that to a JPEG, and then I'm going to call this Steel Floor Alpha. Awesome. And then in Maya Common Output, so this is just asking us what our map size is going to be. So I want to display, I want quite a nice bake for this. So I'm going to turn this to a 1024. Like that. I'm going to keep my transfer in world space, and I'm going to change the sampling quality to medium. Now, if you just want to get a preview, if you want to get like a low, if you're not necessarily worried about the quality, you can do a preview and you can do a low. They're going to make the baking time a lot quicker. A medium and high, obviously that's going to impact your baking time. If I was doing this for a really nice presentation piece, I would do this as high. This is going to take a long time to bake, however. Baking does take a long time. So I'm going to do this as a medium because I want a pretty good example. I want a pretty good output, but I don't want to be waiting a long time for this. Okay. And everything else I can leave as it is. And like I said, connect output maps and advanced options I can leave alone. Now with all that plugged in, I've got my low poly object in my target mesh. I've got my source object in my high poly object in my source. I've got my normal map and alpha map selected, and I've got my sizes selected. So what I'm going to do is hit bake and close and then pause the video because this is going to take a little bit of time. And then when we come back, I'll show you the outcome. There we go. So after a few minutes, we've got our bake, and I've just turned on my texture so I can see what's going on. And if I just move or hide my high poly, you can see now we've got our lovely low poly object. So a single plane that contains a lot of information inside there. We've got a lot of high information, and we've obviously got our alpha information. If I actually bring a light into the scene and get a bit of better lighting situation going on, so I can bring in an area light there, bring that over. Okay, turn the lights on. There we go. So you can see now that has a really nice effect when it comes to our object. So I did apply a Phong-E to this, which is a very, very high reflective object material, a lot of specularity. So but the new object has been applied to the Lambert. So I'm just going to change that back to a Phong. And it should actually remember our input. You can see that it actually remembers that the transparency is plugged in and the bump map's plugged in. So now we've got a really nice specularity to our object. So when I start moving around the light, we start getting some really, really nice effects going on. Especially there. So you can see we've got some nice height information. We've got the normal map giving us the impression of depth and height. Really, really effective. Obviously, we're looking at something which is just on its own. So we can see all like the little issues with it. However, when we start to put these together in a big group, we start really getting the impression of the power of this sort of mapping technique. So now we're getting a big lot of grates. This could be the front, if you're doing something that's much more marketing or kind of like product design, this could be the front of a hi-fi speaker system. This could be the underflooring of a spacecraft. This could be anything we want this sort of texture and this sort of material. It's perfect for. You can even make this and keep it in a library for yourself, and then when you need something like this, all you have to do is come back and grab it. You can work on a very large object, and you can work on a very small object. One thing I really love about this is the fact that because it's an alpha, we can actually see underneath it, which is super, super awesome and powerful, especially if you're doing anything where you want like underfloor heating. Oh, not heating, sorry, underfloor lighting. So you can see there, that the lighting's actually being stopped by the alpha. So if you do want some sort of like very atmospheric under great lighting in a spooky sort of sci-fi environment, boom, that's it. And obviously I've done this round pattern here, but you can, all you have to do is think about what sort of patterns could be used for this sort of asset. Now there is one thing I do have to point out, because this is a material with a specularity. You can see that in the middle of all these areas, we do actually have some specularity. Because there is no specularity transfer map on this, we're not able to do anything about this with the initial bake. However, if we remember that a specularity is just a black and white map, what we can do is actually take the alpha map and plug it into our specular color. If I just bump up those colors and I'll turn it a bit, I'll give it some colors so you can really see what's going on. I'll find that file. So you can see there we've got our white and our black. So if I actually plug that into our specular channel, that now acts like a blocker for the specularity. So now it really looks like it's got a hole in the middle, and there's actually physical geometry there. So I'm actually using an additional map that was made for the alpha and control that with my specularity. I can control my specularity with it. So that's incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. And it's a really quick way for us to either create complete asset packs, or use it as a placeholder. So then you can go in there and make a better one later on using stuff like Substance Painter and ZBrush. Okay, so that's using the transfer maps with the null map and the alpha map, which is probably the most powerful thing we can do with it. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to bring in our next map we're going to bake. Now this is a more simple map to bake technically, but we do have a tile, or I want this to be a tileable texture. Now this is obviously going to be an issue because if I end up having seams either side and it's very, very noticeable, it will destroy the impact I'm trying to have inside my scene or inside my game. So I'm just going to be aware of that. But baking something like this is quite easy. Now one thing I didn't cover with the alpha version is that this has got quite a lot of height involved. It's got the height of these tiles. It's also got the height of the mud flooring. Now I've actually raised this panel up a little bit. This little plane, I've actually raised it up a little bit just so it's not completely flush to the floor. That's because when I'm baking these maps, if some of this geometry is a little bit too far away from my target mesh, then it might not bake in, or we might get kind of like aberrations and kind of faults in our mesh. So what I'm going to do is kind of put this halfway through the mesh, just a little bit like that. So it's going to pick stuff up from underneath it, and it's going to pick some stuff up from above it. Now obviously with the more drastic information you won't be able to pull that off, so if you're doing something which is really coming off the surface, then you'll have to make sure that your low poly has some sort of geometry which is wrapping around that. But for this flat plane, this should just be perfect. So what I'm going to do is, again, go to transfer maps. So rendering, light and shading, transfer maps. I'm just going to reset all the settings, so we'll get rid of everything from the last one. Clear all, so make sure there's nothing plugged into my source meshes, because sometimes stuff does get remembered. And I'll just grab my high poly mesh. I'll add that to my selected there. I'll grab my low poly and I'll add that to my target. So I've got my low poly in my target, my high poly in my source. I just want to pull some normal information off this, so I'm going to select normal. I'm going to say, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to say JPEG, call it tile normal. Use my common settings, yes. Change my map width to, again, 1024 because I want it nice and big. Medium. And again, I'm going to just pause the video, run the render, and then we'll see what happens after that. So there we go, we're back. So if we just hide our high poly, you can see there we've got a little bit of an issue. So there is an issue with our bake. What's happened is it's pulling too much of the mud into it, and it's not pulling enough of our stone in there. Okay. So in times like these, I'll have to do another bake, and I'll have to just experiment. So if I bring this back, what I will probably do in the new bake is raise this up so it's more encompassing the stones rather than the mud. Because if this was ever so slightly touching the mud, there's a chance that it could be prioritizing the mud section over the tile section. So what I'm going to do is rebake this, but I'm just moving the low poly geometry up a tiny bit. Okay. So there we go. After a couple of tries, I ended up getting a correct bake. It's looking good. And just to speed the process up, I did set the quality to low just so it was a bit quicker. Now, if this was working for me, I would now do a proper bake, either in medium or high. We can see what's going on here. We can see that we're getting the height information from the grouting, and we're also getting the height information from the actual stone itself. And you can see actually here, what I had to do was raise it above everything, so that if it was like this, where it was slightly through the geometry, it was still picking up the mud from underneath. So again, experimentation. Just because it's not working one time doesn't mean it's not going to work another time. If I just turn on our material again, because it applies a Lambert, I apply a Phong to that. It's getting nice and shiny there, nice and shiny. Now, there's one thing that I'm not mad fan about this, is the fact that the grouting is also shiny. And one thing that's really good about specularity is the combination of height map and specularity. You can see here that specularity is helping to sell the idea of these being actual raised surfaces. But the grouting's kind of getting in the way. It's also getting specularity applied to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this piece of geometry and I'm going to do another experiment using something that we did over here with the alphas over here. So I'm going to grab all the bottom mud section, and I'm just going to apply that to its own group and hide it. There we go. And then I'm going to do another bake, but I'm going to just do an alpha bake on this. So if I just come back and bring this back down like that again, I'm going to come into transfer maps again. Take away this normal map, just do an alpha map, grab my source mesh, make sure that it's a JPEG, not a DDS. Call this tile alpha. And make sure my settings are the same. So I'm going to do this again on sampling quality low just for speed. But again, pause the video, I'll come back in a minute. So now that we've got that alpha there, we can see that's working. Now what I'm going to do is reapply our height map to this. So change it back to a Phong, so it's nice and shiny. Lights in, there we go. So bring that into a Phong like that. Disconnect the transparency. So I'm going to break connections by right-clicking transparency, break connection, and then inside by bump mapping, I'm going to find that file again. So make sure I'm setting this to tangent space. And I'm going to find that tile normal I made. There we go, like that. Now I'm going to use that alpha map I've just made inside the specular color channel. Now what that's going to do is, if you've not guessed that already, basically cuts off the grouting. So it makes the tiles kind of stick out a little bit more. And then what you can also do, you can also use this as a mask inside Photoshop. So that if you just want to put like an emerald green on the tiles but not on the grouting, you can use this as a mask inside Photoshop, apply the green to that, and it's only going to be going on the tiles. So it's a really, really powerful map, even though it's only just black and white. Again, this is why these simple maps are so powerful, because they're dead simple, but they are just amazing. So there, very, very quickly, we've created either wall tiles for a room or floor tiles for flooring, whatever you want. And because this is a flat texture, what we can do is even see how it looks on objects such as cylinders. So I'm going to apply this Phong 3 to this object. So you can see there it's not looking quite right. That's because obviously we've not set up the texture for it properly yet. So I can just go in there and start to just affect the UVs. Again, this is why UVing is incredibly important. There we go. And there we've got now a round pillar that carries our texture. Brilliant. Now there is one thing that I do have to highlight inside Maya, and it's one thing that kind of really bugged me a little bit about Maya, is we've created this normal map inside here, and it's working pretty good. But if we go to here, and then we go to right-click in our bump mapping, and then go to bump 2D out normals, like that. Inside here, where we actually plug the image in, plugged it in, everything's looking okay. We've got this color space here. Now Maya, for some reason, likes to impose this sRGB onto the screen. It likes to color correct the image for us. Now we don't want that. We've already created this image, this null map through Maya. So it's the raw image is perfect for us, or we believe the raw image is perfect for us. So if we go to color space, drop that down, then go to the top where it says raw, change that. It's then going to change how the normals work, and it actually improves the way the normal works, because this is actually how the normals should be looking. Here, it's looking pretty good. Now that we've made that change, the normals are actually working a lot nicer. They're actually reacting to the light more. They're not, the colors aren't being changed within the actual image and darkening down, which means the normals that it gives us originally are a bit paler, and that's fine. That's what it's actually producing. When it does this sRGB color correct, it'll make the colors more intense, therefore makes the normals more intense. So that, for me, is a much nicer result. It's a lot more subtler. We're not getting as much really, really stark information. If I start panning around the light, it starts reacting beautifully with the surface. You see there. So when you are doing these normal maps inside Maya, just always remember that inside your bump mapping channel, right click in bump mapping itself, go to your top image there, your top option, and here where you're actually importing the file, just change that color space to raw. So I'm actually going to do that over on the original alpha we made here, because this is looking pretty good. But this suffers from the same thing. If I change that to raw, there we go. This will change. It'll lighten up a little bit. The normals won't be as intense, but it'll be much more believable, and the light will work with the surface a lot better. Much, much nicer. So that's one thing we have to be just a bit aware of inside Maya, is it does get a little bit overzealous with how it wants to see objects, or how it wants to see the normal maps of objects. Okay, so that's two really nice ways we can use them. And these are both tiling textures. Obviously this one, I've just made sure that it fits perfectly and stacks perfectly inside a square. And this one here, I've just made sure that any overlap that I have is repeated on the opposite side. So when I come to make a tileable texture version of it, or tiling texture, it's very unlikely or it's impossible to see the seams. Okay? Cool. Right, so what's next is actually to do the last one, which for me is quite an exciting one, because this is a trim sheet. So we've got this piece of geometry here, and it's quite a nasty piece because I've got lots of very, very negative pieces of geometry. I've got these n-gons everywhere. I've got these clustered edges here. Obviously, we cannot take this into a game engine. It would absolutely freak out, and it's not correct. It's got a lot of faults with it. But the layout, for me, is perfect, because I've got this whole thing broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different chunks, or even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different chunks. So if I have all my height information on this, I can just use UVs and basically decide, right, in that area I want to have this top bit, in the bottom area I want to have this small bit. Maybe I want to have this bottom half here be one whole chunk. Maybe I want to have this whole bottom half here be one big chunk. So it's really, really powerful. Super, super powerful. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing again. So nothing should be going wrong in this one. I'm not using any alpha maps on this. I'm just going to be taking straight up normal information off this as well. So I'm going to go through that, and then I'm going to come back with the normal map produced. So there we go. We're back with our trim sheet done here. So when I come to actually use this in a game environment, what I can do is, for instance, I might have a piece of geometry which is just half of this section. So I can literally break it up the exact same way that I broke up the whole thing before. So I can actually separate these bits off. And I can just make all these different variations of paneling from this one sheet. Now this is this is a bit of a different trim sheet, because normally some trim sheets are more just like all in one direction. Say if you're doing things for the edges of the building like dado rails or sconces or shelves or anything like that, you'll just have strips going across linearly. But here you can see that from this one trim sheet I've been able to make lots of different versions, and even I just get rid of that. So this is a single piece of geometry with two sections, but if I go into the UVs, I can then say, right, I'm going to move this over to the opposite side. Maybe that's working for me. Maybe that bit is working for me. Maybe that bit is working for me. So you can see I'm able to kind of flip around and change the different positions of my UVs to adjust what I actually need and what I want. That's the great thing about a trim sheet, because it literally is a bit like a sticker book. I can just go in there and pick what I want. Now this does suffer from a little bit of what these tiles suffered from, where for me, I like to separate these panels off, and in a minute we're getting too much glare, too much highlight in the middle of this. Now I'm going to use one more map, but I'm not going to do transfer maps. This is going to be a different way. I've actually explored this a little bit in the past. I'm going to take this high poly bit of information and then just solo it out so it's just on its own. I'm going to do a planar projection from the y-axis. I'm looking directly down at this object. Mine's just having a hard time because it's a lot of information currently. So this is why using these maps is very good, because sometimes the geometry you're dealing with is just too intense for the software to handle or for your system to handle. There we go. I don't know why mine is doing that, but I'm going to have to just There we go. So just having an issue with Maya being a bit strange with how it chose to project this information down. But I've managed to get all this projecting down. What I did is I just delete the history on this object. There was something in this object and its construction that Maya's really struggling with. And I think it's when I booleaned in a lot of these horrible different shapes that create lots of n-gons, and also the mass amount of edges I've got going on. I would obviously not generally work like this. I would be a bit more, and I don't advise anyone to work like this as well. I'd be a bit more careful with stuff. But as an example, that's what we need. Because all I really need to do is get this projected down, and I'm going to apply a new material to this. And I'm going to apply, there we go, an Arnold shader. So I'm going to come to Arnold, and I'm going to apply the ambient occlusion shader at the very top there, like that. So if I just open the Arnold renderer, we can see what's going on. We can see that our recesses are getting shadowed out where basically light cannot reach. We're also getting a nice little indication of these little Allen key bits as well, which is all I need. So I'm actually going to bake off this map onto a texture itself. I'm not going to do that through transfer maps, like I said. So I'm back in modeling mode. I'm going to come up here to Arnold, come down to utilities, and then render selection to texture. And then I'm going to base 24. I'm going to put my output file as the image file for this, like that. Everything else from this I'm going to leave okay. If I do want a really nice high-res version of this image, I do just want to make my camera samples AA to a high number, not 10 or anything like that. I'd be going up to 4 or 5, but I'm going to leave this at 3 because that's a nice middle ground. So I'm going to click render on this, and then I'm going to take it to the next stage. So if you've never worked with this file before, it's not something that it just gets applied like a transfer map that we've just done. It's not even applied yet. It actually lives inside Photoshop, or we should be seeing it in Photoshop now. So I'm going to start opening up Photoshop. So what this map is basically the absence of light. So anywhere where shadow lives gets darker. Anywhere where shadow doesn't live gets lighter. This is the occlusion of shadow, or the occlusion of light. So I'm going to navigate to that folder. Now, what I'm actually looking for is an EXR file. You see, I've got a lot of EXR files. I do a lot of this sort of baking. But what I'm looking for is this. This is my P. So I know this was the name of the object I baked from, and the EXR is named after the object it bakes on. So I'm going to click this to open it up. Yeah, transparency, that's fine. There we go. So you can see what we're looking at now. So we're seeing all the shadow areas of the grate. We're also seeing like the Allen key areas there. We're getting a lot of information from this single map. Now, because I have to take this into, the reason I have to take this into Photoshop, sorry, is because an EXR file is a 16-bit image, or sorry, a 32-bit image. It's a very large image format. And it's not something that we can actually apply inside Photoshop readily. So what I'm going to do is come in here, go to image, well, open it up inside Photoshop, go to image, and then change it from a 32-bit to a 16-bit. And then just say don't merge, because if I merge, it'll actually kind of ruin the image. If I just click don't merge, everything's fine, everything's looking okay, all good. I can make any adjustments on this if I want to as well. So in fact, you know what I'll do? Because what's going to happen is I'm going to use this as my specularity channel, inside my specularity channel. So I'm going to have my nice occlusion of shadow there, nice occlusion of light, sorry. But everything else is going to be very normal and very kind of flat shading. So what I'm going to do is actually create a slight cloud map. So make a new layer, go to render, go to clouds, and then blend that in. Maybe another blending layer might work better. So let's go back up to that. Blur it out a little bit, just because some of that's got quite sharp lines. Yeah, that's cool. There we go. And I think what I'm going to do, just to really push those shadows forward, is I'm going to duplicate off that ambient occlusion layer there. So it's nice and dark. Cool. So now I'm going to take this in, I'm going to save this into this file. I'm going to call this my trim spec. Take the JPEG, obviously, bring it in here. I can just hide this now. So I'm just using my low poly version. Make sure my image type is set to raw, which is good. And then inside my specular color, I'm just going to plug in that spec map that I've just made. There we go. So you can see there what it's doing. It's really using the combination of the height map and the spec map to really start cutting these different sections of geometry out. Again, it's still just a flat plane, but it's just a combination of shine and of the perception of height from our normal map. And you can see a little bit as well, that cloud map I added in has just made the whole surface kind of undulate slightly. So it's not quite as clean and as pristine as it was before. Now we've got some really nice kind of surface detail on there. And I can do that with every one of these maps I've just made. As long as it tiles, I don't care how I get about this kind of really nice undulation of maps. And then you can go in there and you can also start adding in little bits. As long as you just remember it's black and white, you can start adding in other little bits of maybe there's some water damage that kind of takes away the shine. Maybe there's some oil that's been slicked on. Maybe the separation between these two sections here. So this kind of section split here is duller than this section. You'll have these really nice separations of panels. So as you can see, it's a really, really powerful tool. Really powerful. The combination of the different transfer maps and then the introduction of this ambient occlusion map, which I know my first years have used in the first year, and then in the second year, and second year's definitely used it with me. So super, super powerful maps. And what I would do is just really implore people just to, just experiment with these types of maps, remembering that, yeah, you are creating a flat image there, but that flat image is just a texture and it can be wrapped on anything. And then you can start creating your own asset packs, and then you can start creating your own texture packs and all this sort of stuff. And it's a really, really powerful tool. It's very fun, and it's just a good way to, get used to using the software, get used to using the different maps, getting used to just the different techniques. So you can see I have four polygons here. With vastly different textures and vastly different approaches. So I've just got a flat one, I've got this nice trim sheet, I've got the alpha, and I've got the tiles there. So I hope that helps. If you do have any information about, or if you do want more information about all this stuff works, or if you're just a bit confused about anything you want me to repeat, send me an email, catch me in school. If you're on one of my Slack groups, get me on Slack, and I'll be happy to go through this again, because this is a really powerful technique. And we don't need Substance Painter, we don't need all these fancy softwares. We can do so much just within Maya ourselves, and it's very controllable as well. Super, super controllable. Okay, awesome. See you all soon.